All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us here on a Friday morning. We have what I like to think is kind of a murderer's row to discuss last week's announcement about the PIPEDREAM malware affecting operational technology here in the United States and potentially other countries abroad. First, we have, and I should point out, these are all Atlantic Council senior fellows and fellows. We are happy enough to be able to join by them from within the team. First up is Annie Bachman, who in addition to his work with the Atlantic Council is also a senior grid strategist with Idaho National Labs. We have Bryson Bort, who in addition to his affiliation with the Atlantic Council is CEO and founder of Scythe. Danielle Jablonski, who in addition to the Atlantic Council is an OT cybersecurity strategist with Nozomi Networks. And finally, Megan Sanford, who in addition to her time with us is Vice President and Chief Product Security Officer at Schneider Electric. They are going to be moderated this morning by Blake Sobczak, who's managing editor for README. A bright and exciting new cybersecurity publication everyone should be reading. Two quick remarks from me at the top, and then we'll get into this esteemed group of wonks and wizards on this topic. The first is, as we get into this discussion, it's clear that something that we've known for more than a decade has started to take on new fervor, which is that the significance of operational technology as a target for cybersecurity capabilities is shaping the national security discussion, shaping the way that we leverage our intelligence capabilities and our work with allies and partners abroad. And the reason this is significant, I think, especially for this group, is that it means that the equities and the entities that we have as part of this conversation in cybersecurity is much broader than just the folks with hands on keyboard actually working to secure this equipment. Doesn't mean that that community is not critically important in this discussion. And in fact, I think as we'll see, as many of our panelists here have just returned from the Halcyon Conference on Industrial Control System Security and S4, that community's taken on even greater centrality to this discussion. Their values, the culture, and the requirements that they have take on greater importance. But they are not alone. And in fact, we have to account for some of these other dependencies and other folks involved. The second thing is, this is the Atlantic Council. This is the Cyber Statecraft Initiative. We do want to get questions from you on the international security and geopolitical implications. And we will dive into that in certain respects during this discussion, because as we've seen, this disclosure prior to use, prior to an incident, is really an interesting landmark in attribution and an incident proactive response capabilities here by the US government and some of its partners. The degree to which that shapes the operating model moving forward is something that's an open question, but the impact that it's already had on the community, both policy and operator, is significant. So with that, let me turn it over to Blake to get us into our discussion. We look forward to this portion as well as an open session here at the end. This is entirely public. Please fire your questions away and we'll try to have time to get to them at the end. Blake, over to you, sir.
Thank you, and thanks so much for that intro. And yeah, I believe actually all of us were at the S4 Industrial Cybersecurity Conference in Miami Beach this week, which was a fantastic opportunity to reconnect with some ICS luminaries and people who really know their stuff. I will say, just to kick things off, as a journalist, I work for a new cybersecurity publication, as Trey mentioned, README. You can find us at readme.security, backed by Synac. There's a lot of information about this particular threat that just isn't out there yet. So I wanted to caveat our discussion at the beginning that, yes, we know, for instance, that this is one of only maybe 7 ICS-focused threats ever to have emerged. We know, for instance, that researchers in the government was able to catch this before it was actually deployed and executed in a victim environment, which is fantastic. And I think that was rightfully cast throughout the week at S4 as a win. But we don't necessarily know who was behind this, who they were intending to go for. There are some clues and ideas that I hope we can dive into, and I'm really excited to. But I just wanted to set things, set the stage that way, because this is still an evolving story. And thank you for the Atlantic Council for hosting such a timely discussion on this, because it is just really cutting edge stuff. And I actually wanted to kick things off with Megan, who I think among the panelists is really closest to the front lines of this thing. And the PIPEDREAM /in-controller threat, there was evidence that it was really somewhat aimed at some Schneider Electric and Omron devices. So Megan, I was hoping you could just walk us through at a high level, as you're hearing about this, or what your reaction was and how you handled it.
Sure. So thank you, Blake. Obviously, it's been a very busy past few weeks. So where we're at right now is we're in a phase of the response that I call the post-immediate form of the response, which means that we're still remaining very vigilant with our partner Mandiant. We're still collaborating. We're still in pretty much daily contact, just staying up to date on the information, how the information is propagating, how customers are finding out, how media is finding out. People want to know what this is. And to your point, this was very unique. To be honest with you, working this response with the Schneider Electric team has been the honor of a lifetime, because we've just never had this opportunity. I've worked many responses in my career, but I've never had the opportunity to work a response pre something happening where we were able to work together with our partner Mandiant, with the US government in this way to actually prevent something bad from happening proactively. And so again, we're feeling very proud of this response. It is still around 2 weeks out. And so to your point, people are curious, information is still trickling out, people are speculating. I'm gonna avoid speculation today, but I can tell you that we're feeling good so far about how things are going. And this is a success story. And I mean, when you, historically, when people look back on this in 5 years, they'll say that this was the first real time where the response happened the way that we wanted it to, which was to prevent an attack from occurring altogether and ensure that the right information got into the right hands of the defenders that are out there protecting critical infrastructure every single day. We started working with Mandiant, obviously, weeks ago. This was discussed at length. I think that at S4, Mandiant did a great job discussing in controller. Dragos also discussed it, and they're calling it PIPEDREAM. Both companies are great. We're happy to work with both of them. And we are happy about the analysis that was performed. I can tell you that when the vendor is brought in proactively in an investigation, the value to the investigation is that we're able to better understand how the attack tool and the framework was trying to interact with our products. And there was good data, and our products, as well as another company, Omron, their PLCs as well, they were within the framework. However, the framework itself is very scalable. And so we don't have any reason to believe that there was a vulnerability or a weakness in either Schneider or Omron products. It was just the way that Modbus and Codis's communications framework can interact with these products. But I've described it to people, and Rob Lee, as well as the team at Mandiant, they said the same thing, that the easiest way to look at this, and some people have called it a Swiss Army knife, is that if you could imagine a shopping mall being built, right? And you can see that there's a Schneider store, and then there's an Omron store, but there's probably 20 other stores that could be built out, or you can see that they're going to be built out. That's really what this was. And so our products were in the framework, not because of weakness, but because of our global scale and the fact that our products operate and support critical infrastructures globally. And so it was really kind of your product was in the framework because of the potential target. And I don't know what the potential target was, so I kind of won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's one of the responsibilities of being a global vendor, is that because you're relevant, there's a higher likelihood that you could be involved in an attack framework, and that's what we saw in this case. But overall, we're feeling good at this point. Again, very proud of the work that's been done to date.
Thanks for sharing those insights. And Bryson, I was actually hoping you could elaborate a little bit on speaking generally as someone steeped in operational technology, cyber threats, and really familiar with the space and industry. If you could talk at all to just why it is people are treating this as such an unusual event or such a rare ICS malware framework to show up.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's what you said back in the introduction, Blake. We do not often see these publicly available. I mean, I believe you quoted number 7 on the list of malware families that we've seen for industrial control system attacks. And that, I think, does give some insight into the who is behind it. Nobody wants to ever point fingers without being 100% sure, but there are only a few places that can build something like this. This is not the kind of thing that the script kiddie, the amateur, can all of a sudden gen up and be like, look, I'm doing things against PLCs. These are very complicated machines. Credit to companies like Schneider Electric that really do invest a lot in this. And these are not protocols you can just go up and do against web app pen testing. So the complexity of this cannot be understated. The comprehensive nature of this particular malware cannot be understated. This, I think calling it a shopping mall, it doesn't quite capture it, right? This was Mall of America. This thing had almost everything in it and the ability to add even more. When we look at the number of different kinds of tactics, the level of attack phases that were available in it, both pre and post, and all of the different things it could do to iterate, and then all of the different levels of access and impact that it was able to cause, we've never seen anything that's comprehensive. Which leads to, of course, well, the difference between this kind of malware and this kind of malware really is the intent. So what was the intent behind it? The only other thing we can look to is the derivative family that we saw back when it was deployed in 2017, which looked like it was trying to cause disruptive impact. So the motive seems to be there. What the code looks like it can do also can do this. And this will not be the last time, because we're going to see upgraded versions, because that modularity allows it to do it. The final thing I want to throw in here, and this is kind of where Megan was going at this, is this was not a vulnerability in the core products that were being taken advantage of. It is a vulnerability in the architectural ecosystem and design of industrial control systems, period. So going down a little bit into like the nerd lane, we have this concept in industrial control systems called the Purdue model. And the original intent behind the Purdue model was a way of looking at timing on industrial control systems. And the way that we've started to use it as security has now become an increasing component of industrial control systems is defenders look at the Purdue model like a network architecture for understanding defense in depth, which is not incorrect, but it fails in as much as attacks like this show how flat the architecture actually is. And that's really the true vulnerability in the design. And that is a generational problem. It's not the kind of thing where we can just be like, oh, we're going to go and patch that and fix it. It's something that's going to take a long time with a generational capital return kind of, we have to switch this equipment out over 10, 20, 30 years with the entire chicken and egg of industry and vendors agreeing to move to a different architecture.
Thanks for that. And we just heard about how rare this is from Bryson, but Danielle, I know we connected last week for a README article because there was actually another ICS-focused cyber threat that also emerged and started claiming headlines at about the same time, which is the Indestroyer 2 threat. And so I'm wondering if you can speak at all to the timing of two, not one, but two ICS-focused malware examples emerging. I know obviously that the timeline for InController and PIPEDREAM is a little bit separate, perhaps from Indestroyer 2, but is that significant? And what does that say about the state of the threat landscape?
I think it's significant going back to, I think what Trey said, which is we've known a lot of the concerns that are out there for a long time. What we now know for sure is that our adversaries have done their homework. And I want to go back to touch on the number 7, which is, there are 7 focused technology specific, incidents we've seen targeting the hardware and software we talk about in OT and ICS, but that doesn't capture the full amount of threat actors that are looking at industrial operations. So we missed the kind of access point conversation because we're really obsessed with this technique that we've never seen before. And that's okay. But then when we start to talk about it, we talk about the technologies we're using, and they have these multiple configurations and multiple verticals, multiple end users, multiple production facilities, and multiple communications protocols. And if it's a Swiss Army knife in terms of the techniques to attack those, what I like to tell people, because we're getting into the cool analogy phase of this conversation, is those technologies that we use, because they have those multiple ways we can use them in critical infrastructure, are actually like a Rubik's Cube. And then this was the tesseract of attacks to the Rubik's Cube. So the reason I say that is when we talk about it in that context, regardless of the way you're attacking that context, people start to think of the architecture as plug and play. And that is not the case. It is a purpose-built system of systems integration with multiple vendors in the ecosystem, Schneider Electric being a leader, obviously, but there's so many. And so when we start to talk about it, we get off the rails. But the intent of the actor, like others have said, is really important. Moving away from the misunderstanding of the plug and play ecosystem that comes from a lot of DevOps and things like that, and really focusing on how we break apart the flat architectures of the networks that we care about, do access controls, introduce visibility, get behind these things, and not kind of play from behind, is really important. And another analogy that I like to give, and it'll be the last one, is that regardless of the technology that you're approaching with these different malware families, to Megan's point about the mall, to me, I've been telling folks to break it down a little bit better, is that they also had like the Scantron cheat sheet for the test, right? So because they were able to remotely access and use native functionality, they also had all of the answers to the test. But then again, we caught them. And so People talk about wake-up calls all the time. And I come from a terrorism background, and we talk about that a lot, and I bring it into my conversations. And this is the best ROI case we have for cybersecurity in our field today. As you mentioned, this little segment of the market is just kind of exploding right now. And for terrorism, we could never talk about it because it was always super classified. And I want to commend the people that have kept the malware classified and haven't shared it across the ecosystem, because that's a security threat and a concern. But this is the best potential ROI we could have seen, because it did not actually become operational. And now we can learn from it. It's the best actual wake-up call. We've been saying that for years and years and years that I've seen in my career. So
thanks for sharing that. And Andy, to pivot over to you, I know this involves a wide range of companies based in Japan, a French multinational, US companies that now are hypothesized to be, if not obviously a direct target, then potentially in the scope of this malware, according to Dragos. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the international implications of this, of just seeing this proliferation of OT cyber threats, and how do you expect global governments to respond?
Well, first of all, let me shout out to friends and colleagues, including you, who we're just together, and it seemed like, we don't have to be virtual all the time, and snap back, it's Friday morning, and here we are looking at screens again. Unbelievable. Well,
still great to see you all, even virtually. So,
yeah, I mean, this is a long story, right? About and we all hate the terms "get serious" or "wake up call" because they are clearly meaningless, as the action lags those hyperbolic statements, or they seem to be hyperbolic. This one is not, and there's some threads on Twitter using the term evidence of knowledge gain, rapid knowledge gain, or accelerating knowledge gain per the other frameworks that materialized. I think starting with Crash, or at least for me, starting with Crash Override in 2016.
Crash Override, just to interject, referring to the malware framework that targeted Ukraine's electric grid for people.
Yeah, that was the second December Christmas present that the poor Ukrainians got on their grid. I think obviously ransomware is something that has helped all of us get our messages out to governments, to companies, to nonprofits, to everybody. And most folks have felt, I think many folks, including in government, up until very recently, especially given current geopolitical events, use the policy we call in the CCE book, relying on hope and hygiene. Hygiene clearly is necessary, cyber hygiene, but insufficient. One example that I got from both the Rob Lee talk and some of the white papers on this, and that I think lay people might appreciate, is that we are employing increasingly in our space, and I am trying to speak to your international point because all of this is wildly international. We do detection. We're constantly looking for things coming into our networks, ingress, and things leaving, egress. And that's referred to as looking vertically, things up and down, sort of. Rob Lee's point, at least that stuck with me, was this attack or this package allows you to, once you're on the workstation, the operator's workstation, the engineering workstation, you can have access and do what you want with a PLC, but you can also move now horizontally. With this, you can move horizontally. And even for those folks that have done a good job with zoning and segmenting, and it feels like they're okay, this puts the lie to that, and there has to be some new things. One last point, and maybe it seems like I'm a one-trick pony, but this is exactly what CCE was created for. Mike Asante and several of the folks on this call who knew him saw this coming, and that knowledge gain is evidence of that too, right? You can see, you just don't know how fast it's going to be, but you are going to end up here. We've seen things called modular malware, and even referred to as Swiss Army knives before. It's just there weren't that many blades in the knife. This time the blades are populating, and there can be many more. So,
and Andy, if I can stick with you here for just an extra second, for viewers who may not be familiar with consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, if you could share briefly kind of what that concept means and how it applies to this malware framework.
Okay, sure, and I'll keep this super brief. I'm not I don't mean to be an advertisement for this concept for CCE, but parts of it are relevant here. And to the extent they have been and are being and may also in the future be employed in the US and elsewhere, the core concepts for here, I would say, is it assumes access. So the whole idea of we're going to keep everybody out, and this came up in the conference too, you need to do what you can to keep folks out, hold them at bay, but certain adversaries have a variety of options for access. So CCE assumes that they're in your systems, they're in your networks, and they are learning about your process and your configurations, et cetera. It also begins with identifying your most critical functions, functions that your company, and I think we referred to both electricity providers and pipeline owner operators as likely initial targets. It identifies what you cannot live without in terms of functionality. And then CCE builds the kill chains. And by the way, it's not a tool, it's people. Builds the kill chains that allows them to deliver the payloads, the deadly payloads that are deadly to the target function. In this case, because of the safety systems as well, it's potentially deadly to people and in a plant and downstream as well. So that's I think a short way of how it applies.
Thank you. And I did want to open things up now and actually pull off a quote from Schneider Electric's North America president and CEO, Annette Clayton, that I thought didn't really get a whole lot of coverage, but I thought was really fascinating. And in this blog post, Clayton said that we're entering this, quote, new era of energy security concerns. And this was about the PIPEDREAM in controller malware framework and some of its implications. I just wonder if you all could riff on that. Do you agree? Are we entering a new era? And what does that mean?
I don't think we're entering a new era. I think this is the era we've been in for 10 years. We have advisories. There's a reason the count's up to 7. The only thing that's held it back has been what's the motive for doing something, right? And I think that's the thing most people on this call are going, okay, right, Ukraine's over there, that's all terrible and horrible, but to the layperson, it's like, what's going to happen here in the United States? And the reality is the same as it was 10 years ago, is that this was possible then, just nobody has yet decided to cross that Rubicon.
I would argue a little bit differently. I think that when you work for a company like Schneider Electric, we do electrical distribution. Our focus is really on sustainability and decarbonization. And so when you look, if you put yourself in the shoes of every country on earth, energy independence is security. Sustainability is security. So I think that when Annette says we're kind of turning the corner, you're seeing, what she's really saying is you're seeing the convergence of people recognizing that energy independence in itself is security. So countries want energy independence, they want sustainability, they want decarbonization, and we can provide those solutions. But in order for those solutions to be successful, they have to be secure. And so that's where you're seeing the convergence.
If I could, just because it's on energy, I go back to this framework that I developed for a talk in October of 2021. I said, when we talk about energy and technology, regardless of security or the future of resilience and sustainability and efficiencies, there's a revolution and there's a renaissance. And so the revolution is this hyper interconnectivity, divestitures, solar, wind, energy, et cetera. And the renaissance is, wow, what have we built? Do we know what we've built? Have we secured what we've built? And we go back to those, like Bryson said, we've known the top 5, and I've referenced these for a long time. They were given to Congress at least as early as 2003. The risks that were there, we're experiencing this renaissance of going back and saying, how do we better defend what we knew to be true for a long time? Now that we know it's on the map of adversaries and threat actors all around the world, and they can use it and multiply it because they're read in, right? They've been read in. They're along with us for the ride, but that also can't discount that revolution that we're happening. And I think that all the OEMs have recognized that because they've invested a lot in the revolution, and we need them back for the renaissance. So that's the paradigm that I like to put out there.
Like that, and I'll harp on resilience and focusing on what your dependencies are. If there was ever a time to think, how can I operate through an attack? What are the systems that absolutely must, or the functions that absolutely must be kept going, even when I can't trust some of my core underlying network systems, et cetera? We've got to figure out, companies, governments need to really be practicing that with that earnestness that we have rarely seen. So this is see those statements, wake up, take it seriously. This is a time, man. If you are not completely shocked awake by this, there may be no hope for you.
And I did want to dwell on the energy point a little longer, because I think it's really important for the geopolitical aspects of this, right? And now I know we haven't conclusively identified who the intended target was, who the potential victims were here, but we do have a couple of clues from Dragos and Mandiant. Mandiant suggested some of these nano PLCs might be installed in small manufacturers. Dragos suggested that the precise configuration of Schneider Electric and Omron controllers could appear in several energy facilities, to include liquefied natural gas. Now, we all know, of course, that Russia is a huge provider of natural gas to Europe, and that Europe's been kind of working to wean itself off of that dependency in a variety of ways. At the risk of, I don't mean to devolve into speculation here as to who might be behind this or what its implications could be. I wonder if you all could comment on what the potential geopolitical implications here are of this energy-focused tool. I should say maybe energy focused, because this
is Andy. I'm not supposed to comment on things like this very much, but the whole game is to be able to hold another nation at risk, and to affect their calculus of what they can do in the world, what they can get away with, and their own sense of vulnerability. And so, man, there's never been. That's all in play right now. Every government has to be thinking about, can we operate through something like this were it to take place? And again, thank goodness that we discovered this on the front end, not in the middle of the storm.
Tying this actually into a question that came in from the audience, this also ties in. We've seen wiper attacks that are happening, and those, I think, have a twofold purpose. One is that they degrade the ability to conduct forensics. So you trying to understand the incident as it's happening while the information is being destroyed about what's happening makes it hard to understand what's happening. And so that's a component. And then the second part, of course, I think ties to what we're seeing here in phase 3 on the ground in the Ukraine, which is the Russians seem to be going almost with a scorched earth approach. They are killing civilians. They are destroying the infrastructure. And that's a complete almost 180 from what we saw within the first few days of the war, where it looked like they were just going to, this is probably their mistake, is they thought they were going to kind of stroll into the country, take everything, and you don't want to destroy what you're about to take. And now it seems to be just to cause destruction. Now, of course, we can't quite tell without it having seen it actually employed that was the full intent, but it certainly was capable of that.
I want to go back very briefly to the ROI point that I made, which is I've actually worked in the US government in the past with the national labs too, and writing research reports and case studies. And I've given those case studies back, and the response has been, this is great research, but it's really hypothetical. It's no longer hypothetical, right? The describing the physical impacts of cyber physical systems in the real world. And I never thought I would reference Ronald Reagan twice in 1 week, but here we go. When the movie War Games came out, he famously has been quoted at Camp David as saying, can that happen here? Can that happen? And so again, back to the ROI and the hypothetical nature of the things we've all presented, I think, to US government officials, and probably, at least for me, foreign government officials, where it's like, that's a really scary scenario. We don't know how realistic it is. Now we know exactly how realistic it is. And so again, not to harp on the wake-up call, it is a Reagan moment of, can that happen here? Can that happen now? And the answer is yes. And so that frame of reference for, a global interconnected society all over the world is really top of mind. And it actually extends to commercial, areas as well, right? It has a huge impact, kind of an implosion for markets and for where people gather and for how people interact in the world, because everything is cyber physical, and it's difficult to count and to provide those nuanced examples and scenario planning for what could happen. But now we have an example that's not too hypothetical, right? So
I think that's a really good point, and really important to keep that hyper interconnectivity in mind. Really, it's just exploded in recent years. Everything's getting connected, even perhaps some things that maybe shouldn't be connected to the internet. And Bryson, I'm glad you brought up the questions from the audience. We do have a Q&A. I do want to carve out some time toward the end to take some of those and pass them on to the panel. So you have that Q&A box that you can submit. hovering over the window until you see a menu for that in your Zoom interface here for those watching. Now, one thing we mentioned the Ukraine conflict and the war there. The U.S. now is not at war, and so I'm wondering if we're seeing any implications, knowing again from what Dragos and Mandian have said that some potentially U.S. Intended targets may be involved here. What that says about assumptions about we might not see any cyber physical impact or attack outside of a wartime capability. Is this testing that, or is it still the case that bad actors won't really actually pull the trigger on some of these things until there's a kinetic war or some broader conflict?
Well, how would you define the conflict for the past 8 years between Ukraine and Russia? I mean, that's, I think, the question to this, right? Some of it has been people on the ground with guns in their hands. Some of it has been in that gray space of let's poke things over the internet.
I thought I thought the keynote that kicked off S4, I may botch her name a little bit, but she was remarkable. Nilüfer Rezi Howe. She asked a question during her talk, which was, if Colonial Pipeline happened now and not when it did, how would we interpret that? How did we interpret it then? Government agencies were talking with each other going, what do you think? What do you think? What's the intent? Is it just money? It seems like from the outside that it was just ransomware that went too far and hurt the folks that actually were perpetrating it. But what if it happened now? How do we come to understand exactly what type of cyber impact or cyber sabotage would lead us to say, okay, it's time to pick up the guns?
Megan, did you want to jump in there?
Sure. No, I was just
Thanks,
going to say that we kind of touched on this topic a little bit yesterday in the closing panel at S4, and that I said a big problem that we have is that we're not a mature disaster science. Other disaster sciences can give you really good data sets around likelihood of disasters of any type, hurricanes, tornadoes, pandemics. We can give you geographic location, and we can tell you at any given point in time the likelihood of certain events, disasters occurring globally. We don't do that in cyber. And when you can't measure and calculate likelihood, you have a very large measure of uncertainty. And when you have that large measure of certainty, what that creates is that everyone is basically under the mindset that, well, I can't pick if I'm the victim or not, and I don't know if I'm going to be, so therefore I have to double down on the other part of managing the risk, which is managing the impact, which is what Andy Bachman speaks about, kind of reversing into the problem and knowing what matters most to you, and then making sure that your security controls are in place. But again, in this industry, there's a lot of completely ignoring away likelihood.
Megan, I'm sorry if I interrupted you too.
Oh, no problem.
I'm going to backstop that with the other area where we focus on impact. So on the crisis control and response, it's a great point, but I also mentioned impact, and I didn't give Andy any props for it in my talk about norms, international norms. And I've said probably a million times now that cybersecurity has this ability to hold everything at risk. And if everything is at risk, then nothing is off limits. And that doesn't matter if it's war or peacetime. And that creates more uncertainty in the world, not just from our ecosystem, but for geopolitics and interdependence. And that's something that governments need to work on now. And they've been trying for years and years and years. And it gets into this definitions versus innovation versus, do you regulate capabilities or actors or impacts, right? And it really all does come down to effects-based rather than means-based analysis. And it's something that I think a lot of people are working on and probably don't get enough clout for. That is ongoing. So,
well, I mean, I feel like the Talon manual highlighted pretty well what the rules should be. The reality is nobody wants to agree to that. I mean, they are the right answer, but even our own military will not sign up to it.
Yeah,
that's the Talon manual, Talon Estonia 2.0 on international cyber norms. Do these things; they're good for you, and other people will be good to you as well.
Well, and it's also don't blow up hospitals and don't attack hospitals and don't cyber, impact cyber physical systems in hospitals to cause physical suffering and then expanded to every other environment and ecosystem we care about in OT and ICS. So it's not just things you should do, it's also potentially things you should not do. And then that goes to Brendan's point of who wants to give up what capability, where, when, and why.
And that's the part that is the catch. We don't want to give up those capabilities because we might also have a reason.
I'm not saying anything.
Yeah, now we all have no clearance to continue.
All right. Well, I was going to let you keep riffing on that because it's fascinating stuff, but I will, since we were all at S4, I did want to bring up something that caused a little bit of a stir here at this industrial cybersecurity conference hosted by Dale Peterson. Really draws a lot of CEOs, people steeped in these sorts of issues to Miami Beach each year. Rob Lee, who's the CEO of Dragos, one of the firms that we've mentioned a couple of times today, who's been leading one of the investigations into the in-controller PIPEDREAM malware framework, closed his remarks with a little bit of a fiery jab at some of the hackers responsible for this tool. And I saw it generated a little bit of a polarized response. That some in the community thought it was helpful, some thought it was just, sort of grandstanding. I'm wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that. And maybe if you also would want to address the hackers, what you would say to them.
I mean,
right. I'll just say,
no, go on.
Go ahead, Bryson. I've done it again. I will now pause, please. Thank you.
If only there was some way we could easily coordinate this, like if we were in person. We could have just done this yesterday, and we would have all been together. Why didn't we do that? All right, hope for next time.
For next time, but Bryson, you're going to say.
Yeah, no. So first of all, I mean, Rob has a history of making very passionate comments on the stuff. He cares very deeply, and so I would take it more as this is not a policy comment so much as it was a passionate emotion of somebody who's like, look, trying to cause. And again, Rob has been very direct on this. If you attack civilian infrastructure, you're out of bounds. It's kind of what we were just talking about. And so that's what Rob is saying. I was like, anybody who would do in that, and, provide the epithet. Now, that's an emotional response. The reality is, again, going back to what are the norms? What are the norms we agree to? And so I think that it's fair to say it, but it's also like, what would we say about the soldier shooting civilians? What would you say about the soldiers attacking Ukraine directly? I mean, it's war.
I think we're all on the defensive side. We defend infrastructure, and the infrastructure that our countries, our economies, everyone depends on. And so to me, it felt like a little bit of rhetorical catharsis. Like, hey, Rob wanted to hit you a little bit. He wanted to give you a little taste of what it feels like to be struck back, even if it was just verbally. I think some people in the audience felt like that, a little bit of the offense, which normally we don't participate in.
It's the closest to hackback we're getting, right?
Don't go there. I didn't see the Twitter storm, mostly because I could barely find water yesterday, or Wednesday. But I think the provocation that some took as just that, a provocation, like almost an invitation for future more aggression, overshadowed something else he did say, and is the reason Zombie Networks is in the business that we're in, which is we can catch you and can stop you if we invest in the right things and talk to the right people. And I think that, again, did not see the Twitter storm, but I'm guessing that was overshadowed. And it's the reason that I'm in the job that I'm in. It's the reason that many of us are here today. It's the reason that we met in S4. And I'm a rallying type of gal. And so I think that conversation around, this didn't happen. We're not like, we were like, thank God, but there was a reason it didn't happen, right? It's not because we got super lucky, even though we did. It's because we can do these things. And so when somebody's brought in an incident response and they're fully in that react mode to having most of the pieces of puzzles to do incident response, it's easy to say, haha, gotcha. But haha, gotcha wasn't, it shouldn't be an outlier, right? It should be the norm. It should be the norm that we try to create. And so that's why we all stay in this and get fiery about it. But he did say that. He did say, we got you. And I hope to continue that, right? That's what we want to do. So.
Megan, anything to add there?
I wasn't there. I did see people talking about it. I do understand the reaction to it. I think that what you saw was an authentic and genuine response from someone that's been working in this area for a very long time. And, I don't have any hot takes to say off of someone saying something passionately in the moment.
No, I am curious to hear your thoughts. We heard about how this was basically, in some senses, a success in that we haven't seen it triggered, but we still see these warnings from CISA. We see Mandiant and Dragos urging everyone to, check their networks, have this sort of shields up approach. This also came up at S4, where is there a time when we can go shields normal or shields down, or is it just from here on out going to be a constant state of heightened vigilance based on some of these ICS threats we're seeing? What would it take to get to a little bit more of a normal state?
I feel like you're setting me up to be punchy because we're still like orange from 9/11.
That was the system I was thinking of, because I was like, man, I'm having cognitive dissonance because I had the same conversation 8 years ago about the level system, right? I mean, the bottom line is that you should have already been vigilant. I mean, this was to the point that everyone's made on this panel, like this was kind of a water is wet situation. Like we had such advanced warning. This was a success story. I think that we're just all kind of dealing with the emotional realm of this whole thing played out the way that it did, but I think that everyone's very thankful with the way that the response has played out to date.
I take Shields Up more as marketing. CISA is still trying to become a capable agency. I think we forget how young it actually is, notwithstanding the fact that it was, as an organization, existed prior, but it only became an agency about 3 years ago. It's about 2,500 people today. It is way behind in terms of capability, in terms of resource, and they are theoretically responsible as the primary sector risk management agency for most of the sectors. Until Colonial Pipeline, this stuff was not in the consciousness of the public. It was the first time a president literally uttered these words last year from that perch. And that's not an administration comment. It's just the fact that I think we forget we exist in this expert echo chamber. Well, we're all very familiar, and this is what we do every day. The average person does not wake up and think about this at all. And so that's where Colonial Pipeline was the first thing to really get the attention. But these are problems. I mean, everyone around this table has been working for years, and it's not a question of industry not having got the problem beforehand. It's like anything. If we could sit down over beers and we could all figure it out, if only it were that simple. It is a generational challenge that is going to take that kind of strategic patience and direction and vision to fix.
Speaking of generations, the average person who was just referenced is on the Hill in decision-making positions, and they're in the boardroom. And they're from a different generation, many who really didn't touch computers all that much or keyboards that much in their life. And they're putting their hope in some of the younger folks that they know what to do. And increasingly, I believe, incidents like this allow them to authorize. I think the lingua franca obviously is money. Can we spend more money? Are we willing to spend more money to hire and train better folks to deploy the right types of tools? I think it's been amping up every year, right? This is just yet another milestone that allows those average folks, those people of a different generation, to feel like, okay, we need to do more to support our younger folks who are tackling this problem.
Now, I did want to turn to some questions from the audience. We have some fantastic ones rolling in. And apologies earlier when I was alluding to Rob Lee's comments. I know not everybody, of course, was there. Basically, he was addressing the hackers directly. He said, "You're an embarrassment. We caught you before your malware could even be executed." And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but the other 6 examples that we have of control system focused malware, all at least were executed on the environment, even if they didn't cause the intended effects. So basically, you're an embarrassment. You should be fired. Nobody likes you.
Your mother doesn't like you, I think.
Right? Yeah.
Your mother is upset she ever gave birth to you.
Yeah. So it was very very frank and direct, addressed at the actors behind this, who, again, we've heard Mandiant say they have reason to believe that there's a Russia nexus. Dragos hasn't touched that. The U.S. government certainly hasn't touched that. As to who may be responsible. But I think for a lot of us, who have been in this space for a while, there's a fairly limited set of state-backed actors who would have the kind of capabilities to assemble a malware framework with the complexity and the level of specificity that this one has. Now, I want
to really quickly go back to the CISA comment, just because the Shields Up thing has been overshadowed a lot by a lot of opinions. There was also this joint advisory that was put out And it quoted Rob Joyce saying, I just found it, the Russia situation, which we could throw families into the Russia situation, but actually they have a lot of intel on the rest of the Russia situation, which is how different groups prioritize different means, motives, etc. He said, means you must invest and take action. I don't think that that's marketing for CISA. It might be marketing for Nozomi, but it's not marketing for CISA. That's saying it is time. It is a plea. We are desperate. Please go find the visibility you don't have. And so I just wanted to make that caveat that there are other joint, things going on in government that are actually very beneficial beyond the shields up disclaimer, right?
No, that's important to point out and keep in mind as we look at these challenges. Now, I did want to ask, so this is from an anonymous attendee here. In the face of geopolitical connection and competition and conflict, how should the ICS community counterbalance national interests like Five Eyes versus global manufacturers like Schneider Electric?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure, yeah. It's basically in the face of global geopolitical competition and conflict, how should the ICS community counterbalance national interests, Five Eyes, versus global manufacturers, Schneider? I think the implication there is maybe the goals might not always be in alignment, I think is the suggestion there.
I would say, tell me a vendor that isn't global. I mean, really, if you look at the Seven Sisters, which one is not global?
Well, I think they were talking about the like Five Eyes, like New Zealand, UK, US, and how they're navigating some of these national security ICS challenges vis-a-vis the global manufacturers.
Why is that pointed to the vendors? I mean,
yeah, I
asset
didn't
owners to
understand
me
the
are the
connection
primary
exactly.
point of this, right? This isn't a vendor problem. This is ICS asset owners. And asset owners are working closely with their respective governments because they underpin literally what modern life is. No water, no electricity, people die. And they get that. And different countries, of course, have different levels of regulation or partial regulation, right? We're in a kind of partially regulated with likely more regulation coming in these sectors. But I would say it's the asset owners, not the vendors, that I would be looking to.
Yeah, I would just say I think we had an executive order in the previous administration, the shorthand for which was the blacklist, and thou shalt not purchase or deploy products in the grid that have some parts, software, hardware, firmware, that come from certain nations, right? And which I think gives people a false sense of, oh, if I buy products only from a company headquartered in the United States of America or in the Five Eyes, then it'll be a safe thing to deploy, and there can be nothing bad going on in it. I think it's probably easiest for the regular person that we described on the Hill in the boardroom to be thinking that no matter what the provenance is or where the headquarters is of any manufacturer, everything needs to be given the same level of scrutiny, and only the paranoid survive, so to speak.
So another one from the audience, how much of this preventive moment was because we got lucky and the defenders caught it versus we have the processes and relationships in place, maybe like a fishing pole versus a net?
Well, so some of this was caught before it was ever deployed. So just think about how much pre-work has to go into catching something effectively behind enemy lines.
Yeah, I like the fishing pole versus the net. What we're building in terms of the solution providers is something that couples, the network data that we see and the traffic we see at asset owners, but also the physical processes that are supposed to take place and then the way they're supposed to take place, which we call asset intelligence. And I describe that as, the check engine system, the light for the check engine, and the door is ajar notification. And that's a really simplistic view of the way that we're catching this. But the question for the net versus the fishing pole is a scalability question. For this one, I think we had both. We probably had both, a net and a fishing pole. If you really want to use that analogy for this extent, like you said, behind enemy lines, there was a reason and indicators for, I don't say indicators of compromise, indicators for investigation. That investigation was a well-funded, sophisticated, best of the best type of investigation. That's difficult to scale, but we have the means necessary to do it. So it's a really difficult question to answer, but there are a lot of different data points that go into it as well. Like imagine all of the different idiosyncrasies that came out of the analysis of this framework. there's probably 10 times that go into the investigation of those idiosyncrasies.
I wanted to quickly follow up on the behind enemy lines comment, because you can kind of read between the lines based on what's been said, and that's a suggestion. Is that something that is confirmed, or has that been out there? Like, because that definitely sparked a light in my head. I'm like, do we know is that how this sample sort of emerged? I don't mean to divert from the wider discussion here, but
no one's going to help me out here. Yes. I'm going to shift the topic.
Okay.
I also saw a question in there. It was saying, we were talking about the 7 malware strains. We know that Stuxnet was somebody else, and then everything else appears to be just Russia. Going to the comment that Andy made about who was put on the blacklist to not buy, that was China. We have the public advisory that came out, the joint advisory that came out, showing how China was doing ICS incursions in the United States from 2011 to 2013. Russia is not the only one. I think what it is first of all, we have a proliferation because cyber is now a part of everyday life, right? No business, no organization can scale without computer technologies. And as a result, almost every country in the last decade now has some level of offensive cyber capability to conduct the natural levels of intelligence that you would always do through traditional means. I think the difference is that only a few of those countries still have gained the capability to do this against industrial control systems in a scalable way.
Now, in light of PipeDream, which areas of ICS security still lack attention? That's another question from the audience here. So even in light of PipeDream, like that was unearthed and found out before it could be executed, but which parts of ICS security are still could use more attention?
So I think that all parts need attention. I think that in particular, this was a legacy secure or a lack of secure communications between Modbus and Codisys framework. This is prolific. It's not a vendor specific thing. It's prolific throughout the industry, unfortunately. Again, we talked about this at S4, but what customers should be expecting from their vendors and their suppliers is that they're following a consistent framework like IEC 62443, that they're buying products with security features in them. They're buying solutions that are secure wing to wing. Unfortunately, the reality is that today, and probably even for the next 5, 10, or 15 years, it's going to take time for these legacy fleets, for their caches of products to be upgraded, and for the newer products that are being built with security in mind, for them to become the norm rather than the exception.
That's good.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure where the source of this is. I think multiple people have said it, but back to the person on the street and on the Hill and the boardroom, I think they probably conceive still of cybersecurity as keeping them out, keeping folks out. They've heard of firewalls, right? But so much of what we're discussing today, what we discussed at the S4 conference, and what you would need to do if you wanted to really be a solid defender against something as complex as this, is just fully embrace the idea that you're owned, and you don't know, you lacked the detection capabilities to understand that, and that it's time to really amp up that part of your game, even if you've just started or you haven't even really started it. And then that whole thing back to the resilience diatribe. What would we do if that was the case? How would we operate? Really making that hit people, your own employees and all stakeholders at a visceral level, I think could be quite helpful. Keeping them out, I think that's something from a previous era now for infrastructure owners and operators.
I think our water sector in the United States needs significant attention. Someone asked the question earlier, was this preparation, was this luck? The Oldsmore water attack, we caught that by luck. That was luck. Now, that being said, there were mechanical safety processes that would have prevented the attack from having caused the damage that it looked like it could have done. But there are over 100,000 of those kinds of plants. there's almost no cyber to be found anywhere with any of them because they don't have the resources for it. We don't have the resources. That to me is where the federal government is primed to be able to step in and solve this. But who's the SRMA for that? EPA? How much cybersecurity do you think they have?
For viewers who may not be familiar with Oldsmar, that was an attack, I guess almost last year, that affected a small Florida town, an attempt at ratcheting up the levels of lye in the water supply from an unknown attacker. It was quickly thwarted by an operator who saw it and changed that back to normal levels, but it did raise some alarm bells as to what the implications were for the water sector. And now we're in the midst of this water cybersecurity sprint from the Biden administration. And this actually touches on that a little bit, the government response. What is the strategy, or should be the strategy, to bring in, this is another question from the audience, to bring in talent or build out talent here in the States across all backgrounds to be ready for these new strings of attacks, especially in the ICS OT space, which, as we know, is very a rarefied sort of specialty sometimes.
I would go back to Megan's point about crisis and how we react to crisis and how we plan for crisis and all of the disaster analysis that goes around it. Because a lot of the times for the talent pool, they want to be the unicorns like Bryson of the world. And they want to go in and get all the best jobs at the top. And when we approach critical infrastructure, I always like to say that it's an extension of civil society. It's not an extension of military capabilities. So some of the people coming out of the military that are the best trained will go to places like Schneider. They'll go to the big vendors. And the government kind of regulations and things that come top down will also go to secure the largest populations impacted. That's why we started with bulk energy, right? We knew that they were the larger companies, they supply to larger populations. And that's a little bit of Crisis 101, but it's not all of Crisis 101. And so the pipeline for me for talent is co-ops, utilities, vocational education, apprenticeships, things like that, where we're always pointing to this like North Star of the best and the brightest. And those people exist, but the vast majority of the building that infrastructure from the ground up to then have them build a pipeline that doesn't exist from the ground level, if that makes sense. There's a lot of influx in revolving doors at the very top, the kind of upper echelons of these job opportunities, but there's really no pipeline that's bottom up.
I know my colleagues in Idaho and elsewhere are really focusing on bringing these types of concepts and opportunities into STEM programs. So they're going to grow them from a young age and start to motivate and excite young folks with some interest and maybe some aptitude in technical things, and then bring them over to the infrastructure defense side. So
we're coming up on time here.
We're starting the crop at a younger age.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic points, and I know we're coming up on time here, so I wanted to give every panelist a chance to quickly, sort of 30 seconds, if you have any remarks or closing thoughts that we didn't get a chance to cover, maybe starting with Megan.
Nothing terribly new to add, other than, again, it was the honor of a lifetime to support this response with the Schneider Electric team, as well as Mandia and the government partners.
Thanks. Bryson?
I don't think the Russians are going to attack us directly with industrial control systems, because that's going to invite a military response, which they can't afford. I think they have enough on their hands already. However, I'm surprised that they have not amped up ransomware against our private industry.
Danielle?
I will take the opportunity to not plug my background or my company, but to say that I sit on an advisory board that is building apprenticeships out of the University of Utah, and it is funded by the Department of Labor. If you want more information, please look that up or find me on building that pipeline for talent.
Andy?
For those folks of a certain generation who still haven't quite got it yet, at the gut level, quote General Michael Hayden, who said, "They're going to get in, get over it."
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has really been a fantastic panel. Really appreciate everyone sharing their insights. I thought everyone had some really unique things to say about this new and alarming threat and what it means for the US and international partners abroad, as well as global manufacturers like Schneider. So I want to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting such a timely event. A really fantastic discussion. Look forward to staying in touch with everyone, and hope you all have a great weekend.
Thanks. It was great to see you guys again.
Thanks, everybody.